Welcome. We're so glad you're with us, joining us this evening. Welcome to tonight's Acts 2 workshop, Impact and History of Dementia in the African American Community. I'm Dr. Rob Lukoff, servant leader of the Acts 2 project and professor, Florida State University College of Medicine. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the term Acts 2, Acts 2 is short for the African American Alzheimer's Caregiver Training and Support Project 2. And I hope this evening, I hope and pray you will find this workshop both highly informative and inspiring. Before I introduce this evening's presenters, I want to recognize our partners who have contributed significantly both resources and guidance in the development of the Acts 2 Dementia Caregiver Facebook Live Workshop Series. Acts 2's primary collaborators are the 11th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Florida State Primitive Baptist Convention, the Florida Progressive Missionary and Educational Baptist Convention, the Florida General Baptist Convention, Florida Department of Elder Affairs, and the Florida State University College of Medicine's REACH project. Turning now to tonight's presenters, we have two dynamic speakers, Dr. Floyd Willis and Mrs. Tamika Norton Brown. I have the distinct privilege of serving as moderator for this workshop. Please permit me now just to share a few words about each of our presenters. Our first presenter, Dr. Floyd Willis, graduated from Yale College in 1982 and subsequently obtained his medical degree from Morehouse School of Medicine in 1986. He later completed his family practice residency at Mayo Clinic in 1989 and joined the faculty at Mayo Clinic Jacksonville in 1992. In May 2007, Dr. Willis became chairperson of the Department of Family Practice at Mayo Clinic Jacksonville and served in this capacity until 2017. During his 28 years as a physician at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Willis has held multiple leadership positions. He is currently director of the Wilson Scholar Program, which seeks to enrich Mayo Clinic's graduate medical education programs with a diverse pool of underrepresented learners. His clinical and research interests focus on the impact of neurological or brain-related conditions on persons from different cultures and races. Dr. Willis has participated in and personally led community-based projects, multiple projects on risk factors for dementia in underrepresented minorities. In regards to his family, Dr. Willis has a son, a daughter, and a lovely wife, all of whom greatly appreciate him. In his, I must say, limited spare time, he enjoys meditating near the ocean and shore fishing. Our second presenter is Tamika Norton Brown, my dear sister in the Lord and project coordinator of the Acts 2 project. She has worked in the area of survey development and evaluation for over 22 years. Tamika was the loving caregiver for her aunt and her uncle with dementia and has a deep passion for helping others. Tamika has been a wellspring of support and encouragement for hundreds of family caregivers of older adults with dementia across the state of Florida. During the course of this workshop, I encourage you viewers to share your comments and questions using the text message function of Facebook Live. Your questions will be addressed at the end of each of our two presentations and at the end of our program during a 10-minute question and answer period. Now let's turn to Dr. Floyd Willis.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. I really am honored to be asked by Dr. Glukoff and Mr. Tamika Norton Brown. Just honored to be present here. I see these activities as educational and I see them as scientific. But I think I have told Dr. Glukoff and Ms. Brown before that I really feel like this is the work of the Lord as well. So it's really good work, and I'm just humbled to be able to participate. We will spend some time talking about the impact and history of dementia in African Americans, and it is simply to give us a perspective and some basis, both on how it presents when you see it, and maybe some clues on where it came from and how it might have been perceived in cross-cultural communities, particularly the African American community. And to fully appreciate the perception in the African American community, often we have to appreciate the history of African Americans and how we interact with the entire US healthcare system. Next slide. We'll start with just a general definition of dementia. It's progressive memory loss and loss of other mental functions. Severely enough, this loss, that people begin to lose their ability to interact with each other and carry on their day-to-day lives. There are a number, and we may speak about that in a bit, there are a number of other thinking concerns that are lost. People begin to lose the opportunity or the ability to do math. They lose the ability to have insight and judgment on certain things. They sometimes lose the ability to use and handle words. But with all of that is typically memory loss. And that's how we begin to define dementia. Next slide. Next slide. This slide I'd like to describe to you not necessarily with the word Alzheimer's disease, but I want to focus on the word dementia. And I hope you can see my hands because sometimes I use them to help illustrate this definition. It's one of the most interesting, I think, and important things that we could get from this particular discussion, because often it helps us better understand what's happening to our loved ones and what may actually be happening to people in the community around us when it comes to memory loss. So I don't want you to focus on Alzheimer's disease just yet. I want you to imagine a big umbrella. And I'm holding it right in front of me, a huge umbrella. And written across that umbrella is the word dementia. So thinking problems, dementia, it covers almost every kind of thinking problem you can imagine. Now, if you can see that big umbrella, imagine little tiny umbrellas right underneath the big umbrellas. And these are types of dementia. I will give you several examples. One can have vascular dementia, that's stroke-related dementia. You'll see that on the screen. I am sure some of you have known people who had tremors Parkinson's, a shaking disease. They can get dementia. So that's another little umbrella underneath the big one. We call that Parkinson's dementia. There are several other dementias that probably you are not familiar with. Lewy body dementia, very special type of brain concern where people really are unable to do their activities of daily living. They are intolerant of certain medications. We call that Lewy body dementia, and it's another little umbrella under the big one. But underneath that big umbrella of dementia is a sizable umbrella, and I want you to imagine the word Alzheimer's disease on that one. It's probably the most common type of dementia. I give that explanation because quite frequently people will ask, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? I think probably everybody on the call now has an idea of what that is. There's a big group of thinking problems called dementia, and Alzheimer's type dementia is one of them. I am sure some of you, again, a little umbrella, have known people who were taking too much medication or who consumed enough alcohol that they could not think right. Pseudo dementia and alcoholic dementia. But nevertheless, it fits under that big umbrella. So these are dementias. Next slide, please. I'll pause for a second here to illustrate this particular slide with a story. If you look at the green line, it suggests that as we get older, you see the little arrow is going down, we all lose a little bit of our thinking ability. But if you look at the bottom green line, and as it turns to yellow and orange and red, the memory really takes a downward turn. And that is not normal aging. There's something not right there. And sometimes when I'm giving these kinds of talks, I will wave my hand, which means this is an important point or an important story. And this is a bit of both. And it has to do with a personal story with my own dear mother. My mother was 46 years of age when I was born. So as I began to go off to college, she was quite a bit older than most of my friends' parents. And interestingly, as I was in college, I was in frequent contact with my parents, and I realized that my mother was beginning to repeat questions. I would speak with her on Monday, and she would ask a question and make a statement. And then I would speak with her on Thursday or Friday, and she would ask the same question and make the same statement, to which I would say, Mom, we talked about that already. She would say, well, no, we didn't. Well, yes, we did. And I said, I think you have a memory problem. I don't recall you ever repeating questions like that. Her reply to me is a pretty classic one. She said, I know you are studying to be a doctor, but you're not one yet. So you really can't diagnose me and tell me what I need to do. I said, well, there's still something not quite right. And I convinced her and my siblings to take her to the doctor. And the long and short of it is she had had a small stroke. The point in that story is that she assumed that because she could not remember certain things, that was natural aging. That happens to everyone. And the point of this particular illustration is that her memory got worse in the span of 2 or 3 weeks. And that doesn't happen typically with Alzheimer's type dementia and the other types of dementia. It's a slow, gradual process when we talk about Alzheimer's dementia and others. When something happens quickly and the memory goes very, very abruptly, that should not be categorized as normal age-related thinking problems. That's when you go talk to your doctor. Something's not right there. And I often try to use that story to illustrate that there are many situations, and I could give you a list of things that can cause thinking problems. Depression, anxiety, taking the wrong medication, having sleep apnea, and one of the most dangerous ones is having small strokes. So yes, you go in and see your doctor when significant memory problems are occurring, or you take your loved ones in, because more often than we think, something can be detected that will improve things. Next slide, please. So without a shadow of a doubt, this whole process, this whole disorder affects minorities in a much worse way. This particular article talks about genes, and we may talk about that later on, but I put this clip in just to remind us and to educate us that almost all of the processes that cause dementia affect the Black community in a more sinister way, a harder way. Now, some would say, well, why is that? What would be the explanation for that? Why does memory loss affect some cultures worse than other? Well, if we can advance the next slide, there's an old aphorism in the general community, and probably more well known in the Black community. When white America catches a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. I've heard that quite frequently with regard to the COVID pandemic, but many of us have heard this saying for years and decades in the past. And what I mean by that is that there are lots of things in our culture that can cause memory loss. This is one of those important points. The things that can cause memory loss: strokes. People with diabetes who have more strokes will have more memory loss. People who are overweight will have more hypertension, and they can have more strokes. People who have high blood pressure will have more strokes, and they have more dementia. They have more vascular dementia. And I probably don't need to educate everybody on the call on this presentation that all of the things that I just mentioned affect people of color disproportionately. They affect us more. So although all of those diseases exist in other communities, they really hit the Black community harder. The next question is, why would that be? Why do these diseases hit African Americans in a greater way? Here's where we can spend a few minutes talking about the history. The title of this presentation may be a smidgen misleading because I called it the history of dementia. But the history of dementia in the Black community, United States Black community, is quite limited because the interaction that we have had as African Americans with the Black community has been relatively limited up until recent years. It goes all the way back to the interaction that Blacks have had with the United States healthcare system. And some people suggest that this might be the first interaction that Blacks had with Western medicine. This is the slave ship doctor. The slave ship doctor was the second highest paid person on the slave ship, second only to the captain. And the doctor's job was to examine the slaves before they were slaves to see who could actually tolerate the ships going across the Atlantic to the New World. Next slide, please. Once these Africans became African American, and this is the 1700s and 1800s, this is a slave hospital in Mississippi. It is being very generous and liberal to call this a hospital, because as this particular book written by some scholars at Harvard University, it suggests that the discussion here in these particular types of hospitals was whether or not you sent the slave there to try to recuperate and perhaps have, use the word healthcare provider loosely because there was no healthcare provider sent there. It generally was someone who used herbs and spices to try to help people heal. So did you send them there for that? Or did you simply let them die and go purchase another slave? Very stark reality, 1800s. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can we have the next slide? Let's back up. One more. One more. Back up. Can we go back one more? Okay. Okay, if that's the next slide, that's fine. Okay, next slide. The Tuskegee Experiment is something that many of you may be familiar with. This occurred down in Tuskegee, Alabama, when people were intentionally left infected with syphilis, even though penicillin was discovered between 1932 and 1972. It was not administered to these particular group of people, and almost everyone knows about this particular set of experiments. It's one of the most sinister crimes committed against African Americans in their quest to try to interact with the United States healthcare system. And it is something that illustrates what many of us have to grapple with every day, both in research and in clinical medicine, with this distrust that many people in the Black culture have with the United States healthcare system. Next slide. So that brings me to this particular story, which is another great example of a not so pleasant interaction. This is a picture of grave robbers. This was an illustration from Augusta, Georgia, the Medical College of Georgia. And it actually was brought to my attention as I had conversation with a relative of mine, my brother-in-law, who graduated from the Medical College of Georgia. He graduated in dentistry. We were discussing the whole notion of dementia in African Americans and how do we encourage people to participate in clinical trials. It had been quite difficult to get people to participate in this work. And I think the previous few slides illustrated that the people were very reluctant. The history of interaction with the United States healthcare system was just not a good one. We talked about this, and he brought this book to my attention because in recent months, the Medical College of Georgia was excavating an older building in an attempt to refurbish it. And as they were digging the basement up, they found thousands upon thousands upon thousands of bones. This book was published in 92 or 93, so I'm not talking about 30 and 40 years ago. Anthropologists were brought in, and it was determined that 90% of these bones were African American bones. This was at a time when the students there were taught not to learn anatomy and not to practice their clinical skills on Black bodies because they were thought not necessarily to be anatomically correct. Perhaps the word inferior is the correct one. So you couldn't learn on them. Yet these bodies, based on the book, were being robbed from the graves and taken to this particular area of the college to be studied. The book discusses something that's called night vampires, where people would go into the community to find those people who were ill and who were sick and convince the families to let them take their loved one to the hospital. And very often those loved ones did not return. And, we can speculate what could have been happening. This became so rampant, next slide, that people began to put iron grates over their graves to keep their loved ones from being stolen. So this illustrates yet again one of dozens and dozens of stories that I could tell you about the interaction between Blacks and the United States healthcare system. It not only speaks to the disparities in the care that was rendered back then, but it also illustrates why there has been and still is a great distrust of the healthcare system with regard to African Americans, and a great divide with regard to the care that is rendered to folks in African American communities. There is a huge disparity in the care in general. We have a term that we use when we're talking about how differently certain groups are treated and how differently certain groups are impacted by diseases as opposed to other groups who may have more access. We call it healthcare disparity. And some significant part of that disparity is driven by this particular history: lack of access over time, and when there is access, lack of equal care and lack of trust. So what was my point in all of this? This is one of the great drivers of hypertension that runs rampant in our community: diabetes, strokes, obesity. So it's that as one answer for why the memory loss processes in our community affect us disproportionately. But there will be some good news. I hope I don't forget. I'll tell you some good news at the very end. Let's go to the next slide. So what is the history of Alzheimer's disease, particularly in the Black community? Next slide. This is Dr. Alois Alzheimer, 1864 to 1915. The disease, Alzheimer's disease, is named for him because he was studying some significant memory loss problems in actually younger age groups. He was in Germany. And at that time, there was not a lot of work being done in the United States of America. And if it was not being done on people of color. But we can go back. Next slide. This is Hippocrates. He lived 300-400 years before Christ was born. He is deemed the father of medicine, and there were writings that he scripted that talked about senile dementia and memory loss and people aging into not being able to think appropriately. So it goes all the way back to Hippocrates, several hundred years before Christ. But I am unable to find over in those Greek writings anything that talks about people of color. But next slide. This is Imhotep, born 3,000 years before Christ. And although Hippocrates is called the father of medicine, there are many writings that suggest that Hippocrates learned much of what he knew as transcribed from Imhotep. So many scholars believe that Imhotep really is the true father of medicine. And even back in antiquity, there were discussions about memory and thinking problems as people got older. There were no sophisticated tests and no brain scans, but this is to illustrate that all the way back to biblical times forward, this has been talked about. Next slide. So to bring it forward, while Dr. Alzheimer's was living, this is 1900 to 1943, and this is a United States publication, but I want you to look at those arrows. It's 1945, and you see the first arrow is under black males, right? The average age was about 56. And if you look under the white males, they lived quite a bit longer. Even way back then, there was a disparities in how people lived. But here's the point of that slide. Many people don't get thinking problems, Alzheimer's disease, and those kinds of things until they are older. So this may be some of the early discussions about how is this affecting Blacks in this country. But the life expectancy for Blacks just wasn't very long, 56 for men. And that traditionally is not quite long enough to begin to get Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. I think we will skip over this slide. I will just say that this is another illustration of very, very early work in the 60s, where you began to see some mention of Blacks and African American. Next, advance that just a little bit more. There you go. This is the Mayo Older African Americans Normative Studies, and I want to wave my hand and spend a minute or two talking about this. 20-something years ago, when I first moved to Mayo Clinic, Florida, if I came in with a memory problem to get tested, they would give me lots of tests, paper and pencil tests, to try to figure out whether my thinking was normal. But way back then, they would look at my test and try to compare it to somebody else that was normal to see whether I did better or worse. But back then, interestingly, there were no African Americans to whom my tests could be compared. It simply did not exist, not in the southern area of the country. So we set about going into the community, trying to gather information from people and compel them to take these particular tests so that we could have a set of tests to use to understand how the thinking problems were working or not working in Blacks. This was, less than 15 years ago. And I think it's another illustration that the history of thinking problems and Alzheimer's disease in African Americans as a formal school of study has not been going on very long, 20 to 20-something years, not much longer. Next slide, please. So pulling all of that together, what does that mean for you as caregivers? And what does that mean for our loved one and our neighbors? Pay close attention to this sort of dark orange bar that says 85 plus. And then pay close attention to the bright orange bar, which says 65 to 75. What that means is at age 65 to 75, 5 to 8% of the people in this country will likely get some sort of significant thinking problem, Alzheimer's disease. Probably have it right now. If you were to line up 100 people who are 75, it's very possible that 5 to 10 of them, if we could give them those special tests that I just talked about, they would test positive for Alzheimer's disease. Now, look at the 85 plus slide. That goes all the way up to 50%. 50%. What that means is if you can imagine 100 people standing in the room or in the house where you are, 100 of them. And if you could test them with those tests that I just talked about to see whether they have a measurable memory problem, it's possible that half of them, 50% of them, would have some sort of measurable thinking problem. So that's a lot of people. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for us? For people who are in medicine and people who are of the African American community? Look at the left half of this slide. Now, it is comparing 1990 to 2050. You don't have to worry too much about the millions of people, but I'll tell you, it's going from 28 million to 62 people of persons over 65 who have a thinking problem. The left half of the slide is talking about Caucasians. So 28 million to 60 something million is probably going to double. Now, look at the right half of the slide. This is the African American slide. From 2 to 3 million, all the way up to between 9 and 10 million. Same time frame, 1990 to 2050. But the number of people is going to quadruple. So it's really going to hit our community harder. The baby boomers like myself and others, there were lots of us, and we are all getting older now. So as we get older, as we get 65 and 75, and as the other slides just showed, as we get 85, this is going to be an issue in all communities, but it's going to be a bigger issue in the African American community. And that is why it is so important for those of us who are caregivers, those of you on this call, the team members who are on this call, who are both caregiving in their home for their loved ones, and we're caregiving in the office and in these projects. It's going to be really important for us to forward this work, to grow this work, to spread the word. Because when the community rallies to learn these skills and take care of their loved ones, and also take care of themselves, to understand how stressful this can be on the caregiver. So we must preserve the caregiver and the patient. And it's going to hit this community in a way more impactful way than we have known. So learning these skills and understanding this is fantastic. And the ACTS 2 program is more greatly needed now than it ever was. Next slide. Next slide, please. Great. We really went over this already, but this is one of those wave my hand slides. It's useful to reinforce this. This is a list of things that make you at greater risk for having thinking problems. The red things worsen your risk. They make it more likely that you're going to have a thinking problem. The light blue things help. We think it helps prevent, or it helps mask some of the difficult things that can affect you when there's a thinking problem. Now, the first one is old age. We talked about that. When you go from 65 to 75 to 85, you just have a greater risk of having these kinds of problems. It's just associated with age. Some will say that if you get to be 90 or 95, it's just going to happen, even if it's just a little amount, that the thinking just isn't what it used to be. Second one is genetic factors. We'll talk briefly about that on the next slide. There are some genes that predispose you to more thinking problems and Alzheimer's disease. But look at the others. People who have hypertension have more thinking problems, who have diabetes, they have more thinking problems, who are obese, who have strokes, they have more thinking problems. Here is the good news that I was going to share. This is good news for caregivers. This is good news for patients. Hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and stroke, many of these things can be prevented or treated, right? So what we have to just acknowledge is that although these things increase our risk for thinking diagnoses, we can combat this by living a healthy lifestyle. We can't do much about age. We want to live long. We cannot change our genes, but we can exercise and eat right. And the more of that we do, the better off we are. And again, these are 4 things that are, in my opinion, one of the root causes of why there's so much thinking problem in the Black community: the excess of hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and stroke. Next slide, please. I'll briefly talk about this. Apolipoprotein E4. It's a risk factor. It's a gene for Alzheimer's. Let's go to the next slide. Fairly complicated slide, but I want you to focus on E4, the little yellow E4. Okay, we all have 2 sets of these genes. And if you look at the numbers in the parentheses, I might have 2 2s. I might be 2 2. I might have a 2 and a 4. I, or anyone on this call, might have 2 4s, but it's ApoE4, and each of us have 2 of them. We often don't know what combination we have. Next slide. If you look at that purple line, the bottom line, that is the line that's headed towards dementia. And if you look at the combination that makes that worse, is 4 4s. So if I have 2 4s, this is one of those genes that probably is going to head me towards dementia. Let's go to the next slide. And you can advance it once more. Yeah, we looked at this over time. We were able to collect hundreds of samples of people here in the United States. And interestingly, we were able to collect samples from hundreds of people from Uganda. We originally talked about going to Uganda so that we could compare African genes and African American genes. This was 12 years ago. Whenever it was difficult to fly anywhere and bring back 200 samples of blood. One of my residents, whose name is listed here, had a large group of an organized meeting of Ugandans in Atlanta, and he invited me there, and hundreds of people gave us blood. Next slide. And the long and short of it is, the Africans and the African Americans have more of this E4. Plain as that. So we have more of the 4s, which push us more towards these thinking problems and Alzheimer's disease. But I give you that background to show you the next slide. I hope Yes, the Khoisan Bushmen from South Africa. The Khoisan Bushmen, if you could study that previous slide, have the highest level of E4 of any of a few small groups in the entire world. But interestingly, they get very little thinking problems. This E4 also causes heart attacks and strokes. They get very little of that. So why is that? They've got the worst genes and they get very little of these diseases. I don't really have the scientific answer for you. I have lots of theories. Most of the time when we're talking about this in our circles and discussing it, it boils down to lifestyle. What they're eating, what they're doing, how much they're walking, whether or not they're overweight. Probably it is lifestyle and diet. So why do I bring that up? I will say, even if there are bad genes, and I hate to call them bad, we are what we are. We have to take that and we have to move forward with it. So I'll just say the genes that we're blessed with, even if those genes with which we are blessed seem to head us in the direction of dementia or thinking problem, actually, we can often overcome that by doing what we know to be right for our bodies anyway. So yes, it's useful to know that information about the genes, but always be cognizant of the fact that lifestyle often will overpower the worst set of genes out there. Let's go to the next slide. We made that point. We talked about that. Although the risk factors are there, there's very little of this vascular disease out in rural Africa. Next slide. I won't belabor this point. It's another illustration. Homocysteine levels. There's more of this in African Americans, which increases our risk. Next slide. We did a very similar study. This is a tough one to see, but the red dots are the African Americans, and the green dots are normal. And there's more of this homocysteine level in the African Americans who have dementia than the ones who don't have dementia. So we know this to be true. Next slide. But again, we could overcome even that homocysteine by eating the right things and doing the right thing. So that's a little bit of unpacking of where it's come from. It's not a lot. And again, I grant you, there's not study after study after study of how dementia affects Black Americans from 1900 on forward. There's some in the 60s, some in the 70s. A lot of it is tied to the social determinants of health and our risk factors. And that's really the take-home point that I want you to know. It affects us disproportionately so. But the good news is there are ways to overcome that. Live right, eat right, exercise, reduce those risk factors. So just a few more slides and we're done. 5 key warning signs of dementia. We talked about that early. Memory loss that interferes with daily living. Not typical memory loss like I forgot where I put my glasses. No, that happens to me all the time. Back when you could go to the mall, I would park at the mall and I come out and I don't know which side of the mall I parked my car on. But that's not dementia. That happens occasionally with us all. But asking questions over and over again every day, or a patient that I've consulted with over the last week who literally tells me she's baked the same cake every month for the last 30 years, and now she cannot remember the recipe. So these are memory loss that interferes with your day-to-day activity. The second one, problems in planning or solving problems. You know, to plan a week, to plan a day, to solve problems, even simple math problems that once you could do very easily, and now that ability is gone. The third is problems with words, problems expressing what you're trying to say, not just not remembering, but some people actually are trying, they know what they're trying to say, they simply cannot get the words out. And the same thing with writing. The fourth one, certainly, that accompanies memory is misplacing things and just not remembering where they were put. These are common things that I hear in the office when people come in and they're concerned about themselves or a loved one. And the other is some people will have the insight and they know that the memory is not what it should be, and they simply don't want to be out. And there are others who simply become a bit anxious and depressed from the whole process, and that depression and anxiety forces them to withdraw themselves from society. Next slide. So the importance of having a healthy brain, the importance of being active, trying to lose the weight, trying to eat the right way. Why is it important to have a healthy brain? Next slide. It is said that the soul is the seat of emotions, intellect, and will, but the brain is involved in each of these. What is the difference between the brain and the soul? I would suggest there's probably not much difference. Next slide. There are publications, and this is the magazine. My name is actually in the lower left-hand corner of this magazine. This came to me, Science and the Soul. And this particular gentleman was talking about how really the brain was the seat of the soul, and that keeping that brain healthy truly was salvation and saving of the soul. Next slide. So I often make the comment to reinforce brain health because people often will focus on the heart or the kidneys, and these are very important organs. The heart particularly. Although it may be a little misused, people will say, I love you with all my heart. You know, I left my heart in San Francisco. You are my heart. But honestly, the place where you learn and remember who you love, who has been kind to you, who you love with all your heart, it really isn't the heart. It's the brain. It's the brain where that memory lies, and it is the brain maybe where that soul is seated. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's vitally important to understand what protects that brain. The things that protect the brain, again, also protect the heart and the kidney. But we've got to be very, very aware that the memory is really important. It is probably the center of everything that we understand, everything that we dislike because it might be dangerous to us, and everything that we love because it brings us pleasure and it brings us peace. And some would say that even includes prayer and the good Lord. Now, again, I always say the good Lord that I serve, even if I forget the good Lord is never going to forget me. But I don't want to forget the good Lord. I don't want to lose that memory. I want to do everything I can to preserve it. And I'm going to stop there and make one other very important statement, is that we've heard a lot about the history of dementia and the history of healthcare in the United States system, and how these thinking problems affect our society and how they affect your loved one. But please take a moment to understand that this knowledge is great for you to take care of the people for whom you render care, but you really have to also understand that you have to take care of yourself. And I mean, keep your own brain healthy. Caregivers work twice as long, spend twice as much money, go to the doctor twice as much, take twice as much medications. It is a stressful job. You are able to get along and do that job better when you understand that you have to preserve yourself. You have to spend time away from your loved one for some period of time to find your own peace, because it allows you to and enables you, I think, to more efficiently and with more vigor and energy to take care of that loved one. So yes, many of us grow up and we become caregivers, and we can do it. We just have to get help. We have to get the training. We have to lean upon Acts 2, because the more information you can get, the better. Next slide. So to summarize, Alzheimer's disease is a complicated thing, as all of our slides have said, but study after study suggests that your primary care doctor can probably diagnose it accurately without any scans or without any tests. Go see your doctor if anyone feels like the memory is slipping, or if you have loved ones. See the physician and get things evaluated. Recognize those early symptoms, like I did with my mother. I was not a doctor then, but your intuition works. If something's not quite right, speak up. If it's someone that you love and care about and you're comfortable approaching them, ask them about getting help. Treat things early. As we suggested, sometimes, more often than you think, there are things that are causing the memory problems that might be able to be reversed. So don't stay home or let your loved one or community member stay home if they have not discussed this with a professional to see whether something can be done. And when we know that it's a thinking problem that's gone beyond treatment, when it has been diagnosed, we just want to prepare ourselves with realistic expectations and prepare our loved ones and our family members, support them as best we can. Next slide. I would like to thank the Memory Disorder Clinic at Mayo Clinic Foundation, and once again, my fantastic coworkers at Florida State University for the opportunity to participate. And I will turn it back over, I believe, to Dr. Glukoff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. That was a moving presentation and a daunting discussion of the historical roots of racism as it affects the African American community in this country. I'd like to start out with a question. This is from Heather Bornstein. Welcome, Heather. Does dementia ever get incorrectly diagnosed as depression? Misdiagnosis in the African American community is high, and it makes Heather think that there might be even more of a discrepancy than we think.
Shall I take that one, Dr. Glukoff? I know you can answer that one just as easily as I can. Okay.
Bring it, Dr. Willis.
Yes, Heather, that's quite insightful. And it's not just the African American community. I speak to people all the time. I spoke with someone this very day who was actually, it's the other way around. They were treated for Alzheimer's disease on the medication. But as we talked weeks ago, it was quite clear that this person was very, very depressed. And so we did a very sophisticated memory testing, the very one that we just talked about. And she passed it with flying colors. Except, and Dr. Glukoff is an expert in this area, those special memory tests can also detect when you are depressed. And she was quite severely depressed. So she was given the diagnosis of dementia, and she truly was just very depressed and had not shared that with someone. When you are depressed and it presents itself as memory problem, we call that pseudo dementia, and it happens quite frequently. I can't tell you in the African community exactly how often that happens. I would not be surprised if it did not happen frequently. And I think with good certainty tell you that in decades past, when the testing that was used was not culturally sensitive and it wasn't refined enough to detect subtle changes in people of color, I am sure it was even way more misdiagnosed. So that can happen.
I believe at this point, we'll move on to our next presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. I know that several of you have provided questions or had comments to make. We will address them at the end of Tamika Norton Brown's presentation. And now we have Mrs. Tamika Norton Brown, Acts 2 Project Coordinator, Family Caregiver, and Facilitator, all in one.
Good evening, everyone. What I am going to do is to give some information about what my journey has been, having been a caregiver, and then I'm going to talk about the impact of dementia caregiving on the African American family. We mentioned our collaborators earlier, so I won't go back through them again. Next slide, please. I became a caregiver basically at the age of 8 years old. My aunt, who ultimately passed away from dementia, she had diabetes, very, very bad diabetes. She had her first surgery when I was 8, and I promised her that I would be there to care for her as long as I was able to. And I can say that I was able to fulfill that promise that I made at 8 years old. I often tell people that caregiving is nothing that I would have chosen for my life, But looking back on it, it's nothing that I would change at this point either, because it has made me into the person that I am today. I did not know that I am as strong as I am had I not gone through some of the things that I went through in my caregiving journey. I just feel like my outlook on life would be a lot different. When I speak to a lot of caregivers, and the one thing that we all have in common is that we love our loved ones and we want to do the very best that we can by them. And I will admit that when I was caregiving, I worked in this program. I did not take advantage of resources that were available to me. I was very hesitant in bringing other people in and letting them know what exactly was going on behind the scenes. My aunt lived in the Winter Park area. I lived in Tallahassee. Every Friday, my husband and I would pack up our daughter. We would hit the road and we would go to Winter Park so that I could make sure that everything that she needed for the week was there and it was set. It got to the point where she was no longer able to, after she had her amputation, of course, she was in a wheelchair, and we noticed that the dementia was getting progressively worse. There would be times where I would call and talk to her on the phone, and as Dr. Willis mentioned earlier, I would just have told her something, and she would ask me that same question as if we'd never had the conversation before. I would travel to see her. I would to her house, and I would see her through the stained glass on the door, sitting at the door, and she refused to open it because she didn't know who I was. And so I have gone through some very challenging things as being a caregiver, but through it all, I have learned that you do the best you can with what you have right now. Don't worry about what you don't know, but take the opportunity to learn as much as you can, to empower yourself so that as that caregiver, you are taking care of yourself as you strive to take care of that family member. I have also been blessed with the privilege to be a facilitator in our Acts 2 groups, and I'll tell more about what Acts 2 is toward the end, to work with those caregivers just to let them know that there are other people who are going through the same thing that you're going through, that you're not in this alone, and that we all need support, and there's absolutely no shame in asking for help. What I'm now going to do, next slide, please, is to give some background information on African American caregivers. Approximately 80% of adults with dementia receive care in the home from family members like myself or other significant others. African American caregivers, we spend more time in direct care, so we do the heavy lifting, we do the bathing, we do the dressing, we do the feeding, we do all of those things, and we're also more likely to engage in caregiving tasks that non-Hispanic whites don't engage in, just more because we keep them in the home. African American dementia caregivers, we're at a substantial risk for developing declines in mental and physical health. I am a prime example of that. I developed high blood pressure. I developed anxiety. I developed insomnia. And those are some things that from my long-term caregiving that I still deal with today. And African Americans report higher levels of burnout from dementia caregiving, less access to resources. I often joke and say, when I was caregiving, I was stressed out. I was not going to go and lay on anybody's couch to tell anybody about the things that I was going through. And part of that is just because that we would like to take care of the resources, but there are certain barriers to that. Maybe the physicians they don't have our religious portion taken into that, or maybe they recommend things that we just typically would not participate in. Next slide, please. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give a real life story from a caregiver who participated in our Acts 2 project. Of course, we have changed the names to protect the privacy, but we're just going to talk about the story of Mike and Susan and about that caregiving double bind. So in this example, Susan is a 70-year-old wife and primary caregiver for her husband, Mike, and Mike was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The African-American couple, they live in a small town just 20 miles west of Jacksonville. Mike had become increasingly agitated due to the wife's decision to get some help to hire a part-time attendant. He subsequently struck out at the attendant and asserted that I don't need any help and anyone telling me what to do. Next slide, please. Susan went and spoke with her primary care provider and told him, that she felt like giving up. And how can she manage Mike the way that he is? She had to get a loan from her uncle just to help to cover the cost of the attendant. The doctor recommended that she see a counselor at the mental health clinic that's affiliated with the practice. And Susan stated that she didn't have a mental problem, that she wanted to talk to someone who was trained in working with dementia caregivers and had a strong faith orientation. Those were the things that are important to her, and she didn't know of anyone like that in her community. Next slide, please. Here's the dilemma of family caregivers. The story of Susan and Mike is a very common scenario. It's a very common scenario for minority caregivers of older adults with dementia and other challenging medical conditions like those who have had a stroke or who are experiencing heart failure. And we also talk about those treatment barriers, as I said before, that stigma of mental health services, the cost in getting attendance. And many would love to get these services, but can't obtain them due to the limited options and providers who might not share their values and are not culturally efficient. Next slide, please. How can we bridge the gap? I know we've talked a lot about these are some of the issues that we face, but on the other side of every issue, on the side of, where there's a cannot, there's a can. So now we're going to talk about things we can do to bridge the gap. Next slide, please. This can be accomplished in many ways by experiencing skills building and support where and how the caregivers need it. One way to do that is to expand the access to evidence-based skills building and support through the use of telehealth technologies. COVID has taught us that telehealth works. So you use low-end technologies such as the telephone that are widely available. It's low cost, and typically you don't have to train someone to use the telephone. And then there's also the matching of the interventions to the socio-cultural characteristics, the psychosocial, and the spiritual needs, as well as provider preferences of underserved minority caregivers. We talked about being able to go to someone who shares a commonality with you. This leads us into Acts 2. And what I'm going to do is talk about how we can link African American dementia caregivers to faith-based skills building and support. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to talk about our Acts 2 program. Acts 2 is a free faith-based skills training and support program for African American caregivers of loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia. Now, I will add that the 12-session program is for African American caregivers, but anyone who calls us, we will refer to resources that are available in the community. I will also state that, yes, we are faith-based, which just means that we've woven in things like prayer and scripture and meditation and faith sharing into the actual sessions, but we're also ecumenical, so we're open to everyone. So just keep that in mind that, yes, the 12th session is for African Americans, but we will gladly help anyone who calls us. The way the 12 session program is structured, it includes 7 group skills building, and there are 3 persons in a group, as I spoke before, that important piece of letting caregivers know that they're not alone. So each group has 3 persons in a group, and then there are 7 group sessions and 5 individual sessions. All sessions are delivered over a toll-free telephone system, so there's absolutely no cost incurred, and there's the convenience of being able to call in from wherever that caregiver may be. In the individual sessions, the caregivers get to focus on any goals that they have come into the program and identified. And that's very important because many times people will ask, how is your loved one doing? But people don't often ask that caregiver, how are you doing? What are the things that are important to you? Are there any specific things that you want to work on? So they get to actually work for 5 sessions with their group facilitator on goals that are important to them. Next slide, please. The contents of the skills building modules. We have 6 major components. The first is the overview of the basic characteristics of the dementias, or what we call the Dementia 101. There's relaxation training that's integrated with prayer and meditation. People mistakenly assume that, in order to relax, you just go home, you get in your recliner and you relax. There's a whole technique behind it that we teach in the actual sessions. There's effective thinking, which is just basically changing the way you think about your caregiving situation. Next slide, please. There's also my favorite, building in pleasant daily activities, or what I like to call the me time module, just trying to find ways to, talk with your friends, to take a prayer break, to listen to music, to take a walk. And there's also communicating assertively with family members and health professionals. And then the last component is developing effective problem-solving skills through those goal settings, those individual sessions that I spoke about earlier. Next slide, please. What I'm now going to do is talk about some resources that are available. We have the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, the Florida Department of Elder Affairs, the Elder Helpline, the Elder Locator, and the Alzheimer's Disease Education and Referral Center. Next slide, please. Okay, how can caregivers contact the Acts 2 project? Multiple ways to contact us. We have our Facebook page, which you are here on tonight. You can contact us through our Facebook page. We have a toll-free number. That number is 866-778-2724. We have my local cell phone number, 850-274-4945. We have my email address, tnnorton@fsu.edu. And we also have our website, which we're going to bring up so that you will be able to kind of get an idea of what our website looks like. Okay, on our website, there are many things that are very useful for caregivers, and the print's kind of small, so I'm just going to make sure that I hit the high points. We have links. If you would click on links, please. That takes you to resources that are available in Florida and also nationwide. We also have, if you will click Caregiver Resources. Caregiver Resources, there are multiple things on this page that people seem to like. There's basics of dementia. We also have caregiver prayers that are also very helpful, that are listed on this page. If you will go to the donate button, please. We also have a donate button. We are funded through grants, and we do have private donations and investments. So if you feel moved to check this page out, or if you're moved to donate, we also have a few videos there as well. Please feel free to check out our donate page. And then most importantly, if you would hit sign up. If you are interested in signing up for our 12-session program, or even if you just have questions, you can always go to this page, enter your information. That comes to my email address, and I will absolutely respond to you. You can put your questionnaire if you want to sign up for the 12 sessions. Any information that you might need from us, if you would rather not call, but rather go through the website, you can contact me through that page. Next slide, please. What we're now going to do is bring everyone back up so that we can have a panel discussion and answer any questions that you all may have. And I do apologize, I did talk a little fast just to try to get us back on, but please feel free to ask any questions that you have of us at this time. So I'll turn it back to Dr. G.
Thank you. Sorry for being on mute. Should know better by now. The presentation was excellent. I do like that part about with every cannot, there's the opportunity for elaborating the can do. And you are, and Dr. Willis is our can do persons. You are the can do's of our community in serving persons with dementia. Let's take a question from one of our viewers. Glad that you're here, Miss T.C. Harris. Are the number of Blacks in dementia studies improving, or does the past still have a lasting impact in the involvement of studies involving persons at risk or with dementia? Dr. Willis?
Sure. What a great question. The short answer is the numbers are improving. They improve when you spend enough time in the community, connecting with the community and explaining why there's a great need for this. And it's interesting what a fantastic role the Black church plays in getting this done. The memory loss study that had several hundred people in it that I showed a slide of that we followed for years could not have been done had it not been for the leadership in the African American church who supported the fact that we needed to have this information. So slowly but surely getting better.
Our next question comes from Constance Pierce Lackey. Thank you for submitting it. Miss Pierce Lackey, is dementia ever reversed with medication, Dr. Willis?
That's a good question. And as we talked about that big umbrella, it all depends on what kind of dementia it is. Now, there are certain kinds of dementia, believe it or not, thinking problem, that are caused by medication. And if you simply stop the medications, the sleeping pill or the depression pill or something that's making a person not think well, sometimes that improves. I suspect you're curious about Alzheimer's type dementia, the one that happens over a long period of time. Can it be reversed? At this point, I think most of us would say no. Sometimes it can be slowed a bit, but to actually turn it back once it truly is Alzheimer's disease, we're not at a point yet that we have that cure, that medication.
Miss Brenda Freed speaks to the mistrust of African Americans in the current healthcare system, that it's justified. She also elaborates, Black people were horrifically considered inferior, so they didn't want to, in quotes, study them, but loved ones were taken away to be studied, and graves were robbed.
To be said, please pardon me.
Appreciated the information, Ms. Freed, I believe, is saying this was eye-opening for her and possibly for others on this presentation.
Yeah, the mistrust, yes, is quite justified when you know a little bit of the history, and it has been approximately 420 something years of work that created the mistrust, and maybe 30 or 40 years, maybe 50 or 60 with the Voting Rights Act when there was some allowance to go into real hospitals. But it is very difficult to erase in 40 or 50 years what has taken 300 years to create. So it's a slow process, but we're working at it.
We have a comment from Miss Vonador. Is it better to have your loved one that has dementia seen by a neurologist rather than a primary doc? If so, will the neurologist do MRIs to see the progression of Alzheimer's disease?
What a great question. But both, if you can have access to it. And the long and short of it is, there are a lot of people who only have access to their primary care doctor. Some don't have access even to a primary care doctor. If you're in a rural area, an urban area, an area where there is not a behavioral neurologist, it's really important to see your primary care doctor. Much of the time, they can sort out what needs to be done, and then they send you to the neurologist. Very often, we'll do the imaging and the brain scan. Why do we do that? To make sure there's not been a stroke or a brain tumor or all those kinds of things. The primary care doctor generally evaluates things to be sure it isn't something he or she can't fix. And when we know it's Alzheimer's type dementia or a special unusual dementia that doesn't quite fit into Alzheimer's, yes, we try to send people to neurologists when we can.
Once again, from Ms. Pierce Lackey, is dementia sometimes called pre-Alzheimer's disease?
Yes, that's a very good question as well. And I think technically we call it MCI, mild cognitive impairment. I think that's what you mean by pre-Alzheimer's. People will begin to lose a little bit of memory and they can still do everything else. And sometimes people will have that and it never gets to full dementia. So you are correct. There are some people that get this early dementia and it never progresses to anything. And with regard to dementia, don't think it reverses things. It can sometimes slow the progression. Some of these kinds of medications are also good when people have not only the thinking problem, but when they have behavioral problems. They're agitated, they're lashing out. They really are difficult to keep at home. These particular medicines will help. They don't generally turn back the hands of time, though. So some doctors prescribe them routinely, others don't. I tend to really like to use them when someone is not only having memory problems, but they're having behavioral problems as well, because sometimes it will help.
Another question from Ms. Heather Bornstein. Thank you, Heather. What are the first few steps for caregivers to get past the hump of mental health stigma associated with dementia and for their own care?
Oh, that's a Tamika question for sure.
From my personal experience, the first thing I had to do was to realize that just because my loved one had been diagnosed with dementia did not mean that there was any lack in me. That was the biggest thing that I struggled with. I struggled with, what are people gonna say if they know that I'm having some difficulty in dealing with my caregiving situation? What are they gonna say when they know that I'm not sleeping, that I'm not eating, that I'm constantly on pins and needles? So the first thing you have to do is to get out of your own way and realize that resources are there to help you and that there is no weakness in saying that you need some help. So I think a lot of times as caregivers, we put more of the stigma on ourselves than other people put on us. So my advice would be to just get out of your own way, open your mind, and just be willing to accept any help that's available to you.
Thank you, Tamika. Thank you for your affirmation, Heather Bornstein. I have a question for both of you. I know we're rounding the bend. We're going a little bit later this evening. However, the extra time is probably appreciated by the audience. What do you think, Tamika Norton Brown and Dr. Floyd Willis, we can do to increase the quality of services and their uptake in the African American dementia caregiver community?
Well, Tamika, may I start by commenting on something that you said in a previous question?
Mhm.
You could read it and interpret it a little bit of a different way. Sometimes I think people will attach this mental health stigma to their loved one, the person for whom they're caring, and they are a little worried that they don't want to go out into the community. And what if Ma does this, or what if Grandpa does that? How am I going to deal with it? What are people going to say? Because sometimes there's just a little reluctance in that. So I think we have to think about that a little bit, take a hard swallow and say, I'm the caregiver, it's not my fault. The patient's not their fault. It just happened. And I'm going to go out and seek the help. And not only that, I'm going to be an ambassador for this whole process. I'm going to learn what I can, and I'm going to tell other people. I'm going to help this process in my own house, and I'm going to try to help it in the community as well. And you can sort of flip that whole reluctance and what am I to do to say, I'm going to learn what I can do and I'm going to share it. So I think that's one way to think about it and approach it, which is probably going to help the caregiver and the care recipient as well. But Tamika, what's your thought?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I am the type of mindset that says if there's a service that I need and I can't find that service, I'm gonna make as many phone calls. I'm going to send as many emails as I can to say, hey, have you thought about this? Or, who should I contact for this? I think that as caregivers, once we empower ourselves and like you said, realize that this is nothing that we've done wrong, and you have to be the advocate for your loved one and for yourself. And so just take a proactive, I'm all about being proactive rather than reactive. So take a proactive step to make sure that if something is needed in your community and it's not there, that you ask the questions to find out, how can I get this service in my community? And that's a great first step.
So may I give Dr. Glukoff, may I give you a plug? Because many of the people on the call may know it and they might not, that you have done some groundbreaking work, you and Tamika actually, and invited me to participate on how to get information to caregivers in innovative ways. And so I think that's another thing that we have to leverage: the phone, the web webinars. And Tamika, you said it best, the pandemic has taught us a lot of things, but the one good thing is that sometimes we can connect to people in really helpful ways medically without them having to come together face to face. So I would applaud that work and say that's one of the things that I think people have to really be top of mind. Now you can get counseling and training and access to. Before pandemic, you could not get a neurology consultation via Zoom, and now you can. You can get just about any consultation that Mayo Clinic Florida has to offer without leaving your home. So the technology, I think, is going to help. We got to, as caregivers and caretakers, leverage that.
Susan Lewis, you have the last question. My loved one has dementia with strong agitation where will not let medical staff care for him. Should he be taking medicine for dementia, Dr. Willis?
He should. And that is a very tricky thing to do when he may be agitated enough that he does not want to take medicine. But he should be taking medication. Now, how can I so quickly say that he should be taking medication? Because I believe as we care for people with dementia, when we can't cure it, they need to be comfortable, out of pain, safe, and dignified. And I've heard many people at our memory disorder clinic say that. And when someone is agitated all the time, doing things that they typically wouldn't do, it's really not them, and it does not allow us to preserve their dignity if we don't do everything we can to fix that. So I believe your primary care physician or the neurologist can come up with a way that your loved one can take a little bit of medicine to keep them calm, and then they can take the right kind of medicine. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try to do that to preserve that person's dignity.
Thank you, Julie Menendez. And we would be happy to share resources not only in Tallahassee, but across the state with our partners, the memory disorder clinics, with the Dementia Care and Cure initiatives, with the Department of Elder Affairs. This state has become a bastion of resources for persons who are caregivers of older adults with dementia, more so than in other states across the union. Thank you so much, everyone, for your positive affirmations. I do want to give you a little bit of a taste for our next workshop, which is taking place Thursday, December 10th, 7 to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The title of the workshop is Reducing Risk for Dementia: How to Make Exercise and Healthy Eating Fun and Easy. And we will have Miss Wendy Barber, who is a nutrition and exercise specialist, not only sharing information, but actually demonstrating how to exercise and enjoy yourself in your home environment with no equipment whatsoever, making it fun and easy, possibly for you as a caregiver, as well as your loved one with dementia. I want to thank Dr. Willis, my dear sister in the Lord, Tamika Norton Brown, and project coordinator. I also want to thank two other individuals behind the scenes, Miss Chrissy Souders, who is the producer of this program, and Melissa Powell, who is a media specialist and public relations coordinator for the FSU College of Medicine. Could you just show yourselves briefly on our on the slide, to have a slide of both of you. Come to the table. We want folks to see who you are. Thank you, Laura Copeland. There's Chrissy Souders. Where's Melissa Powell? Well, maybe we don't have Melissa Powell right now. Yes, we do. Thank you, Melissa Powell. The two of you have been instrumental in supporting our efforts to bring Facebook Live workshops using the StreamYard platform that increases the degree to which persons in the audience can interact, where we can pump slides, we have videos, and we love those banners that are rotating all over the place here. And we thank you for joining us. Have a blessed evening. Bye-bye for now.